All right, Carlos.
Okay, good to go. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Leighton for joining us today as well. How's your Wednesday going?
Wednesday's going pretty good, man. I was in Italy last week, took a little bit of a break, so yeah, back to it.
Refreshed and back into the H2, Q4, everything with it. So thanks everyone for joining. Really looking forward to diving in on what otherwise might seem like a little bit of a premature topic, but as it always happens, certainly an opportunity to get ahead of ourselves sooner rather than later. Before the shorter days and kind of busier times in the world of e-commerce. So just as a quick introduction, I can kind of give we can use the kind of first couple of minutes to do so. We kind of give a little bit of background about ourselves. Ultimately, kind of work through some key elements to kind of give everyone as many actionable takeaways as possible today, in terms of goals. Also as well, diving into tactics across both acquisition and retention, both in the context of Black Friday. So just before we dive into the meat of today, just a quick overview on who we are. So for anyone not aware of us, Karl O'Brien is my name. I'm the co-founder of a company called StoreHero. We help e-commerce brands and agencies get a true view of profitability in order to make better profit-driven decisions. We do that in three ways. So we help you kind of get all your data together in one place, review that with kind of sales, marketing, and profit in mind. We help you build an AI-driven forecast to actually map out what success looks like month on month, and then a simple traffic light system on how to actually manage that. We're currently working with hundreds of brands in about 15 countries now at this point, all looking to grow, but do so with profit in mind as a consideration for everyone. And again, delighted to be joined by Leighton today as well from Leading Social. So Leighton, I might just hand it over to yourself for a quick intro as well.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining. I mean, Leading Social has been working really closely with StoreHero for the past 3 years. I think we were probably one of the first agencies to get onboarded, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and some of our own clients are on the webinar now, and like they'll know that we use you guys heavily in all areas of kind of planning and optimizing the overall strategies for the businesses. So this webinar makes perfect sense, and for us to kind of, and I think we've done a really good job. Like even some of the slides might have been a bit last minute. I think we did a really good job of like blending the agency side based what you see on the kind of more technical side, and I'm really looking forward to kind of going through what we've put together. In terms of Leading Social, I suppose a very quick rundown. I was a Facebook ads freelancer from like 2015 to 2020, was handling a couple of clients at a time, and one-man band, worked really closely with a guy called Ask Paul. You can see us here, and we scaled that business up phenomenally, and he exited that business, and he was one of my first kind of big case studies. And me and Paul then joined forces, and now we have Leading Social, which over the last 3 years is an e-commerce agency focused on acquisition. So all of your kind of, or even organic strategy, paid advertising across Meta, Google, TikTok, and then also building out that retention system, email, SMS, loyalty. And then we work really closely with the StoreHero lads to blend that relationship between brand agency and kind of finance to really just get the plan fully locked in. And yeah, you can see some of the team here that we work with. We're based in Dublin. I do a little bit of speaking a couple of times a year, and yeah, you can see us at a shoot, and we attend conferences in Vegas, and there's me and Karl in that was in London last year. I think that was actually probably this week last year actually.
Yeah, probably would have been actually, yeah, July. I remember it was a very hot day in London. Back again this year, but in any case, yeah, great. Really appreciate that background. Ultimately, what we want to do today for the benefit of anyone listening is find a nice balance between strategy and tactics. Ultimately, this is the time of the year where ultimately we have the opportunity and, time and scope not to just be kind of, in that frantic rush to put out whatever, ads, campaign, whatever the case may be. We can take a step back and have a little bit more of a methodical approach, not only to drive make things happen, but make the right things happen. And especially with the benefit of kind of previous Black Fridays behind you, that's really what you want to do. So we'll be kind of trading back and forth across a couple of key principles over the next half an hour, and ultimately we'll leave time for questions as well. Just as a note, please do leave questions as we go. Drop them in the chat, and we'll, if it fits into the content really nicely and seamlessly, we'll answer it right there and then. If not, we have time at the end. Really what we want to try to understand is what are the key challenges, maybe fears, concerns people have around Black Friday? What worked really well maybe last year? Did you want to double down on? but equally what didn't work as well that you want to mitigate and kind of solve for. And we'll do what we can over the next half an hour to kind of adjust and kind of frame the conversation in relation to that as well. So one of the kind of initial points I think often acts as a good reference for these kind of discussions is starting with that end in mind in the context of goals. Ultimately, really a key question we have for any brand looking to build a plan for Black Friday is to understand what they actually want to get out of it, because it's not the same for everyone. So what we try to do is distill, that North Star goal into a couple of key elements in a couple of different scenarios. Ultimately, most people want to drive revenue, but what's actually under that? It's not typically revenue for revenue's sake. Some businesses want to maximize profitability, and in doing so, use the kind of increased incentive to purchase to get a kind of a greater volume of sales, and in turn, a greater volume of profit. Now, ultimately, depending on whatever the North Star goal is, you can kind of see where I'm going here. We need to set individual decisions, and there's kind of some components that will, and lower level kind of decisions that can easily be made if we make that kind of higher level decision around what our overall priority is. If we want to maximize profitability, there's certain things we need to keep in mind. For example, we might need to expect and make sure we're accounting for a lower CPA. If to leave margin on a per order basis, we can't afford for that margin to be eaten up by a high ad cost per sale. So we need to really make sure we keep that in mind. Equally, high profit per order is kind of the other side of that coin. For some brands we speak to, maximizing sales volume is really important. They actually just want to actually get out there, use it as again, that increased incentive to purchase, to nearly use it as a marketing exercise to kind of help them kind of get some visibility that they can use through the rest of the year. And more sales and more volume ultimately serves that, in and of itself. With that, you might be willing and expecting to pay a little bit more to acquire customers because you want to do more of them, and in turn expect a little bit of a lesser profit as well. Thirdly, you might want to use it to acquire new customers. So ultimately, again, there's maybe a lower barrier for entry for maybe individual customers versus different times of the year. They're in market to buy, in advance of Christmas, and on that basis, we can really take advantage of that and give them an offer and a proposition that actually ticks that box for them. So with that, we have to kind of fork up a little bit more in terms of our cost per acquisition, but in turn, can expect a lower profit per order. And then finally, while it's not necessarily the ambition of any brand, it's the reality. E-commerce is a very dynamic industry in which we're dealing with a lot of stuff coming at us, and one of those considerations is around inventory. And it can be a good opportunity, a time of the year, to clear that existing inventory and turn that inventory into cash, albeit maybe not at the exact level of profit that we want, but ultimately cash nonetheless that we can use to actually set ourselves up for the new year. With that, again, same thing. We're going to be willing to spend a little bit more, eat into our profit, but again, for the greater good from there as well. Ultimately, what we would always recommend people look at, especially in the context of BFCM, is not just look at individual orders for their own sake, especially when acquiring new customers. Ideally, you want to use it as an opportunity to acquire the right kind of customers. And ultimately, what we mean by that is the kind of customers that will come back again and again. And we can measure that through lifetime value. For anyone not aware, ultimately lifetime value should represent the value that a customer generates for you over a specific period of time. Now, that lifetime typically is 12 months, depending, unless you're in a little bit of a different scenario. You want to look at the value that maybe a new customer drives for you over the first 12 months. Now, value is an important term there. What do we actually mean by that? Because most of the time when people talk about LTV, they talk about lifetime revenue, which ultimately everyone unfortunately can appreciate. That's not necessarily the value that you get, left over at the end of the day. So really, in a StoreHero context within the StoreHero platform, we're talking to people about LTV on a gross profit basis. Again, much truer sense of the actual value you can derive from an individual customer over time. Just to give a specific example of this, so this is a cohort view. It's a new one for a lot of people, but a really powerful way to understand what a customer is worth to you over time. So what you can see here is, as time goes on, this kind of functions like a timeline. Let's say, for example, we're looking at customers we acquired in July 2024. We acquired 683 of them, and it cost us €25 to acquire them. And what the kind of various kind of columns will show us is what's the profit that each customer accumulates over time. So you can see here on the first order, they'll generate €25 of gross profit. After 3 months, that will rise to €30. After 9 months, that will rise to 35. So ultimately, we can get a much clearer view of, again, the true value of a customer, not only looking on a first-time customer basis. The one thing that you have to be very careful with Black Friday is, and Cyber Monday and the kind of Q4 period in general, is oftentimes when you're acquiring customers, that if you're starting a relationship with that customer by way of a discount, they're naturally going to maybe behave in a different way than your other locked-in customers. They're going to be naturally more discount driven. Now, that's not breaking any news, but the important component there is, okay, well, that should affect how much you're willing to pay to acquire them. So you can see here in this chart, like the profit on first order, if you read down in that particular column for each month that we acquire customers, is anywhere from kind of 25 to 26. But we can see for November 2024, we spend €16 to acquire a customer. They only generate €14 of profit. But unlike some of those other months where we start to see people coming back, oftentimes we see the November customers, they tend to be a little bit more one and done. Now, ultimately, that's not an issue necessarily. It's certainly not ideal, but it's something we can build into the plan if we have visibility. So broadly speaking, what I'd really recommend people do is understand not only what the profit that maybe previous Black Fridays orders have driven, especially in relation to your other orders throughout the year. Okay, we'll probably expect a lower level of gross profit, but equally, make sure you're clear on what you should be willing to spend to actually acquire that customer. If that customer is only generating €15 profit for over 12 months, there's very little benefit in spending 17, 18, 19 euro to acquire them. Whereas actually, if maybe it's a lower value kind of discount driven customer, but they actually come back and we recoup that cost, then all the better, and we're set up. So again, better to have visibility on that and use that as one of the kind of building blocks as you move into creating a clear plan for success. From here, we want to understand what is our path to profitability. So we understand in that scenario, okay, what's the profit we generate on first order, how much we're paying for the customer. And those numbers can be different based on your industry. For example, if you're selling furniture, you're going to want to make sure that you're driving a profit on that first order. You don't know when somebody's going to come back. But equally, on the other side of the coin, if you're a subscription business, then ultimately you can be somewhat guaranteed that to a certain extent, you're going to see some incremental sales. It might be different for everyone. Exactly how long that lasts will change. But in that case, you may be willing to be unprofitable. I think what we often find is some businesses end up in the middle here. It's not really those two clear extremes. So it can be hard to understand, okay, well, my products or my business can support repeat customers. Is it actually happening? So getting a view of that LTV, it's part of our free trial. You can sign up and it's always a worthwhile exercise. Actually see where you are, see what a customer is worth to you over time, and then in turn, what you should be willing to pay for them. And then Leighton, I'll pass it on to yourself.
Yeah, and so we want to kind of understand why brands start too late. And this happens, business is business, and things change on a monthly and yearly basis, and things take up our time, and relationships with either internal team members or agencies change. So a lot can happen, and the months go by quick. Like, I can't even believe it's the 2nd of July already. So a couple of reasons why brands start too late. And like, I know Karl mentioned it's a premature conversation, but it's not really. I mean, it's only a couple of months away, and by the time you get everything lined up and creative done and a real kind of strategy in place, it'll fly in. So they don't have the right support. So that kind of circles back to, and things are also changing a lot. One reason why I think what we do really well is, I'm constantly, like, I'm basically like a research team for the agency. Like a big part of my role is to go find out, okay, what's happening, how are the platforms changing? And some brands don't have the right support on that. Even kind of working with StoreHero, they have their ear to the ground on everything that's happening in the industry. They have access to hundreds, maybe thousands of brands, and they're able to share those insights. Last year went well, and they assumed the same. So that happened obviously a lot during the COVID time. A lot of people that I was kind of working with, they were kind of banking on, okay, we had a great Q4 last year. This is exactly how we run our business. But sometimes that's not always the case, and consumer behavior changes. Other brands creep up, they take market share. So that's another big thing too. They're stuck in the day to day naturally. Whether it's your CMO, whether it's your social media manager, whether it's yourself. You're stuck in the day to day. You don't really have time to zoom out and think about, okay, look, what's happening here now in Q4. They think October is early enough. This is quite common with brands that are like, oh, maybe a year or two old. You know, they are educated on Black Friday. Everyone's saying to them, oh, you know, like, what are you doing? And they're getting pumped up, but they don't actually understand, you know, how much preparation actually needs to be taken into place to really kind of knock it out of the park. And they wait on final stock numbers. Not a huge common one, but it's there. And, you know, some people say, okay, I'm going to wait until I have this all lined up before I make my plan. They underestimate paid media pressure. So, like, you know, like every year, CPMs just rise, and that's just a fact. And a lot of agencies will, you know, they'll say, okay, my cost per acquire customer is really strong this year. You know, that's gonna stay consistent into the second half of the year, or Q3, Q4. And it's very rarely the case. You know, there is obviously some superstar brands that are able to fulfill the creative demand needed to kind of keep it at the same level. But naturally, you know, everybody, not even just e-commerce, but, you know, all the kind of bigger brands, you know, your Coca-Colas and everyone, they're all the toy brands, they're all pumping a lot of budget during that time period, and naturally the platforms are just more expensive. And they're waiting to see what competitors do. So again, that's kind of maybe early stage brands a year or two in. They really like to kind of see, okay, what offers are they running, 3 for 2s, free shipping, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, lead the way. You know, don't wait for everybody else to show you what they're doing. You know, sit down with a whiteboard and get some ideas on there on what we can, you know, plan now before reacting to what everybody else is doing. So yeah, that's kind of what I say. In terms of important metrics and consider, apologies if these are a bit, you know, obvious for some people, but I think it's really good to kind of just circle back on them with Black Friday and Cyber Monday in that context. So new customer acquisition cost. Again, understanding like where that's been year to date, and understanding like what that looked like in Q4 last year. It's really important to you know, map that out on a month-to-month basis, and then also forecast what you'd like to achieve from in October, November, December, and maybe even, you know, map out, like stress test that a bit. You know, add a couple of euro onto it and just see how that affects the rest of your P&L. In terms of customer lifetime value, obviously an obvious one, but just sitting down and understanding, okay, what can we do to really kind of shorten down that kind of time frame, and understanding, okay, well, look, if our customer purchases 2.5 times in a year, what can we do to make that 4 times a year? What can we do on the retention side to really get those customers over the line? Something that we learned, like me and Sam and the team learned last year, was there's quite a bit of a capacity for people who purchase during BFCM for whether it's for themselves. And then what you see is in that kind of first or even second week, if they're getting late, the second week into December, is they're purchasing again. We're thinking it's probably for, you know, a family friend or for a gift, and also vice versa. If people are purchasing for a family friend and then, you know, they get into December and say, okay, look, I'll have that too. You know, what can we do to really get them to purchase as much as possible? And then your marketing efficiency ratio, understanding where that's been year to date, and if you are mapping out your year from a 12-month perspective, understanding, okay, what can we do to really maximize our sales here for this year, taking into consideration our marketing spend. And the best thing that we're learning working with our clients is getting a lot of the good accountants will, you know, talk to their brands and have it on a spreadsheet. But with StoreHero, like, everything is just integrated on, like, once you get the big things in, you know, your content fees, your agency fees, and then maybe some of your other softwares, it really does paint a very clear picture. And sometimes, like a lot of the cases, you know, people don't want to like pull the curtain of their own business and understand, okay, like what is actually the result of my marketing efforts. But yeah, making sure that you're clear on these 3 going into Q4 in particular is really important, and making sure that aligns with your kind of yearly goals. So yeah, just to reiterate, we all know that, you know, there's a lot of brands closing shop this year. Something that I'm learning, not so much in like the Irish and the UK market, but anybody in the US. And like, Karl, I'm sure you're seeing it. Like like last year and the year before, I saw a lot of, you know, 6-figure brands that were closing, but there's a lot of like 7-figure brands and 8-figure brands that are just shutting down shop. And like, you probably have more kind of visibility as to why that would be, Karl. But I think people are just overextending themselves on stock, or maybe they're too ambitious in terms of their performance. Like, what would you think, just off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think a big thing from my side is cash flow. That's the challenge. Where, like, to your point, inventory is such a kind of and, you know, demand driven purchase. You know, it's such a big animal that oftentimes, you know, those costs have kind of risen over the last couple of years. Customer acquisitions have risen. There's potentially been a little bit of space there, a little breathing space with kind of cash reserves in the business. Maybe it was a case that there was some kind of revenue-based financing there that kind of helped bridge the gap. And as that stuff isn't as accessible, everything is kind of fallen due, and businesses are kind of forced with kind of reckoning with the unit economics a little bit more, with the financial orientation. Putting the foot down in terms of spend is probably not as much of a measured approach anymore. While it might drive revenue, profit isn't always moving in that same direction. So it's a massively important point. It's like, especially reverse engineering a plan and building a plan at this time of the year has to appreciate those variables. And equally, like it's the people who are having this conversation now who are in a position not to fall into those traps as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then, just to kind of wrap up on having that plan, like we mentioned, ad costs are only going one way. Everyone needs clarity on cash, stock, and spend. Creative takes time. We'll get more into that in a couple of minutes. And like I mentioned, why not lead the charge rather than reacting to what everybody else is doing and reacting to the consumer. So
cool. Great. So ultimately, from that perspective, just to summarize, we have, we hopefully have understood our North Star goals. We've understood the value of actually getting organized early. We've a sense of what a customer is not only worth to us on first order, but over time. And therefore we've a sense of how much we should be willing to pay. So as we look to acquire customers into Q4 and BFCM overall. So when we have our plan, we have our fundamentals, we have our forecasts, potentially done through the StoreHero platform or done through a spreadsheet. We have a couple of resources at the end to kind of go through that in more detail. Now it's a case of diving into our tactical plan. How do we acquire customers and how do we retain the existing customers that we have effectively? One of the first pieces that we always recommend looking at is reverse engineering a really strong new customer offer. And ultimately the word offer has become synonymous with discount. That doesn't necessarily need to be the same thing. What we mean when we say offer is like, what's the trade for money that you're looking at in a traditional kind of marketing context? What is the kind of pitch you have to that customer? And what's the value you want to deliver them for the cost you're willing to charge, or you want to charge them? That new customer offer needs to be compelling, and there's a couple of different ways that we tend to recommend that's done, and compelling both for the customer, but also compelling for you as a business. So ultimately, it's first and foremost, and we very rarely see situations where customers win without a strong AOV to start with. It ultimately gives that breathing space where ultimately between bundling a ton of other elements, starting with maybe your higher value products, it certainly doesn't leave you at the razor's edge of like, okay, this is only how much I can afford to acquire a customer. As Leighton mentioned, as customer acquisition costs are rising, ultimately we can of course try to push them down, but equally we want to figure out, okay, how can we actually make that cost work for us? What can we sell somebody to make that cost a justifiable return? With that in mind, a great AOV order ideally has a great gross profit per order. It generates that margin to help absorb that cost. And ideally, it should be a compelling introduction to the brand as well. For example, whether you're selling, I had an example, a recent conversation with customers selling gel nail polish or perfume, it was another one. They ultimately start with a starter kit. It's an introduction to the brand. There's an initial first-time purchase made, and it kind of allows for subsequent orders to kind of take place as well, which is hopefully a good against starting somebody on the right foot rather than just kind of discount driven, very high percentage off where it's hard to kind of work people back. Ultimately, again, all of those things being kind of set, ideally we want to have an offer that is actually going to work in ads. Depending on whatever that offer is, does it not only introduce a new customer to the brand, but is it something that we can actually get at a good CPA? If it's a very kind of education or intent-driven purchase, it's hard to communicate that in an ad very quickly in the madness of Black Friday. Whether it's a simple, clear proposition, and maybe that's factored into the kind of products that you choose. And again, ideally, as we said there, the example I gave kind of falls into this category, but ideally we want a new customer offer that gives us an opportunity to grow AOV, whether it's replenishment of the same product, whether it's complementary products, whether it's kind of an upsell or kind of a next tier that people can move on to, a bit of a sense of what that next step looks like, And that's a kind of a pathway we can start to lay out for that customer over time. One feature that brands get a ton of value out of is our lifetime value by first purchase, helping people understand what are the products that are being bought by new customers specifically, not just their driving sales. And based on those first-time customers and the products that they purchase, how does that affect them coming back? So for example, we could see here on product one, we generated 233 new customers in this time period. And in this particular case, we can see that we generated €31 of profit and €66 of revenue. And 11.5% of people came back. Whereas on product two, we generated €25 of profit and only 5% of people came back. An example I often give, I spoke to an ice bath company, and they saw that if somebody buys the thermometer with the ice bath, they're twice as likely to come back later. And logically, it kind of makes sense. If they buy the thermometer, it's not as maybe intimidating to get into the ice bath. They stick with the habit. And on that basis, they're not a one and done customer. So trying to figure out what that is, what are the behaviors and kind of starting points, the hero products for your brand that actually supports that kind of good quality kind of customer over time. From here as well, a common question we would often get is, how much should I discount? And the reality is it depends on your goals. And we're not for or against discounts, but ultimately what we're trying to figure out is the discount you're given going to actually help you acquire more customers, and going to actually help you lead to more revenue or more profit overall. The discounts we don't like are discounts you give up for no reason. You're giving up margin without anything to show for it in the form of extra volume. It doesn't allow you to acquire customers cheaper, whatever the case may be. So as an example here, we can see two kind of situations where in one scenario, both of these businesses driving, $1 million in revenue. In one case, the discount percentage is 10%. We still have our same cost of goods. We generate obviously 10% less gross profit, and assuming our marketing cost is actually 300 or 400K, it can actually leave us with a very different number that we can be willing to spend to acquire that customer. So if I give that 10% discount, I can afford to spend $30 to acquire a customer. If I don't give it, I can afford to spend $40. So again, it's not just the discount and the profit in isolation you're left with. And equally, it's not just the cost for the ad. It's like, what am I paying in Google, Meta, TikTok, whatever it is, to acquire a customer? And what am I getting back in value? And ultimately, having that as part of the equation, understanding how that affects your ability to acquire customers often sets you up much better. From here as well, a couple of ideas to kind of practically build this into your process. So again, as we mentioned, structure your bundles to expose customers to new products. Ideally, what you don't want to do is just, especially this is kind of the same thing for repeat customers, is Black Friday ideally shouldn't just pull forward sales they might have made between January, February, and March. For example, if you're selling like shampoo, in that case, if they buy kind of a multi-pack and then they don't purchase for another 5 months, where otherwise they might do anyway, you're not really creating new sales. You're just giving away discounts for somebody that might have come back naturally. So ultimately, if it's an opportunity for you to introduce them to new product lines, that's actually worth potentially giving up some margin for it, because again, there's something to be gained longer term. And one other piece as well that we always recommend looking at is simple tools like Upcart for cross sells and upsells within the actual Shopify cart. Simple gamification will ultimately allow people to still continue on the purchase process, get people to that checkout quicker, but ideally pick up some worthwhile recommendations on the way. And ultimately, in terms of free shipping, that can be a great incentive, but again, it's margin we're giving up. And if we're giving something up, we want to know we can get something back. And the biggest piece and the simplest way to look at this is to make sure, ideally, your free shipping threshold is 20% above your AOV. We often see situations where the free shipping threshold is at the average order value. So it's not actually an incentive for people to spend anymore. They're actually spending that anyway. So on that basis, it's not really, again, giving people that nudge, and we're not giving up, we're giving that margin for nothing. And ultimately as well, specifically when it comes to high value repeat customers, do try to kind of approach the messaging with them kind of different. I'll hold on that because I know we actually have a bit more to touch on in that in the next couple of slides. And I suppose finally, in the context of acquisition from my side, again, just to kind of recap, the lower your gross profit on that order, the less you can afford to spend to acquire that customer. Again, that might be fine, but again, looking at those two things together. Discount, again, some situations you can have a situation where that discount driven customer can actually cause that lifetime value to be lower. And also make sure you're correctly breaking out between acquisition discounts you're willing to give up for a new customer, versus offers that maybe are too aggressive for repeat customers in which that's the kind of group of customers that you're really relying to use as a base for how you can actually acquire customers moving forward. Now, Leighton, one of the obviously big pieces of this is creatives as a variable within your acquisition. Performance Max and Advantage Plus have kind of done a lot of the target bidding strategies. Targeting has changed from a media buying perspective, and creatives are one of those levers. So, jumped ahead. Obviously, that's a big variable. I know you have a couple of really good points on.
Yeah, 100%. And you could do a 3-hour webinar on that. But in terms of acquisition, so if anybody wants to drop into the chat like what your main kind of acquisition channel is, it usually is Meta. There's some cases where it's Google, and there obviously is some cases where it is TikTok. But things have changed a lot over the last couple of months and the last couple of years. The next slide will kind of go into how Meta has changed hugely. But in terms of acquisition, what you want to look at is, okay, first off, the obvious is kind of look at your Q4 last year, like what offers worked, what creatives worked, and what kind of messaging, what kind of hooks, and get them onto a spreadsheet, and make sure you move them forward into Q4. In terms of for this year, using tools like Foreplay is great. So when people on board with Leighton Social, Sam creates essentially it's a vision board of all of kind of competitors, similar businesses, and keeping a close eye on what kind of hooks, what kind of creatives, what kind of graphics they're using. And it's good to kind of monitor that on probably like a bi-weekly basis. Mild is really good to kind of keep an eye on email and the creatives that you're running on the email side of things. And then obviously you have like your ad libraries to do your own research on the offers that your competitors are running now, and the kind of, again, hooks, bodies, and call to actions that they're using. Lean into building your campaign briefs and conversations on Meta's Andromeda update. So that'll be the next slide. But make sure that a lot of people will be kind of briefing their content now or getting the plan around that now. So learn, educate yourself, because these platforms, like I said, are always changing. So you need to educate yourself on what's working now, because what worked last year won't necessarily work this year. TikTok Shop. So TikTok Shop is a bit of a pain to get set up, but if you're gonna incorporate that into your overall strategy this year, get that set up now. That could take like a couple of weeks if things are going wrong to get that set up. And in terms of affiliate, like you want to start building those relationships, especially if you're in Ireland or the UK. The US have a bigger pool of creators to work with. But in Ireland, the UK, like you really want to kind of start building those relationships now and get them into your ecosystem. Understand what kind of messaging works well from a TikTok Shop or from a creator perspective, and just kind of get all your ducks in a row. And the obvious one this year is kind of AI. I have a lot of conversations on a weekly basis with other agency owners, people in the States, brands, and from a artificial intelligence perspective, it's not 100% there in terms of creating content, but to be honest, next year probably will be, and that'll be across the board, across video and static images. But use it for idea development. Use it for and we all use it. There's no shame in using it. Like it can spit out so many great ideas. But use ChatGPT to understand, what kind of hooks or what kind of angles can I use. Scrape all of your, if you do have like a large e-commerce business, scrape all of your reviews, scrape any Reddit forums, scrape any kind of comments from Instagram posts or any viral TikTok videos, and put them into an agent and get it to suggest TikTok angles or content angles off the back of what customers are saying about your product. You'd be very surprised about what people can actually uncover off just digging deep into Reddit forums is actually a big one, and then also the TikTok comments, because there's obviously so many. You don't have time if you're really pumping out content. You don't have time to read every single one. So if I was to kind of summarize before going into the Andromeda update is, get really clear on what worked well last year, and then use the tools that we have available now to make a solid plan for what's going to be going out for Q4, and take all that into consideration, what Karl said about creating the offer and trying to pump up that AOV.
One other piece that I'd recommend on that side as well that people can do to take the opposite side, if you have kind of a leading competitor in your particular sector that's a brand name that you're consistently kind of up against to justify, actually using their, instead of using your own reviews and positive reviews to write your ads, you could use your competitors' negative reviews as well. Understand, okay, what are the key points that people are missing in a market leader that they're maybe familiar with, that actually really makes you can have a compelling offer as well as you kind of go to talk to them in your ads.
Yeah, and just set up a project within ChatGPT so it kind of remembers everything and just consistently feed it. It's a phenomenal tool, and yeah, I will say in the kind of near future it'll get to a point where we can kind of really rely on some nice ads off the back of AI. In terms of Meta Andromeda, so this is Karl, how much have you heard about this year? Because we know a lot about it, but I think for such a big change, there's not a lot of conversation happening around it. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, definitely not. I think it was kind of like the first announcement happened like a couple of months ago, and it was kind of in the background and kind of it gained a bit of resurgency recently, or at least kind of about a month or 2 months ago. But yeah, it's a big change. I think it kind of speaks as a general principle to like the change in role of a media buyer. Ideally, you want an agency who's considering this kind of stuff and building into their plan, and not just operating in the kind of same ad structure. Typically the way I would see this is, previously your ads had to be quite fragmented. You had to really have your hand on the kind of lever, on the controls, because ultimately you couldn't trust Meta or Google to make decisions on your behalf. And now as that's really evolved, it's like actually, okay, where we can be really responsible for creative production and inputting, giving this machine the right inputs, and the machine has gotten a lot better. So based on the machine you're using, and let's say you make a product and you have a really specialized machine, you need to look at the instructions. You need to look at you need to build your process, and give the right inputs to maximize the output. So that's really how we would see Andromeda as a general principle.
Yeah, 100%. And I do, to be honest, from my perspective, without a doubt, Meta has really improved from a performance perspective. Even from our own ad as an agency, it really, I feel like whatever they've changed on the back end side of things has really had a positive impact across the board. But yeah, again, just understanding and knowing what kind of creatives you need to give it. But I would also probably say just a little bit, take it with a pinch of salt. I'm speaking about it now because I know it's obviously the direction that they're going, but I still feel with some Advantage Plus campaigns, it'll still unfairly allocate majority of the budget to 1 to 4 creatives, and some really potential strong ones don't get the budget allocation that they deserve. But regardless, it's going in this direction, and to be honest, it could probably be 100% in the next kind of month or two, depending on how fast the technology evolves. But overall, if you've been running Facebook ads for a while, you'll know that the old kind of scientific way of doing it would be, you have your 20 different interests, and it's all about precision and trying to really identify that customer. Now it's really kind of changed, and it's much more about, speaking to your customer throughout your creative and allowing, without the human involvement of deciding, what interest, or there was even times when years ago now, where you'd kind of consider what movies people were watching and target people based on the movies. That's how kind of granular you were getting. But now it's very much, let the machine find the person, and your job is to speak to the customer through your hook, through your body, and through your call to action. So before you test maybe 3 to 5 ads manually per campaign or per ad set even, and now Andromeda it says once, but probably I should say Andromeda supports 30 to 300 plus unique creatives in a single structure. So again, this is what Meta are saying. This is what is responding well for some clients. I do feel like sometimes the budget is spewed too much too early. Obviously, the goal is for Meta to figure out, okay, well, these are the ones that are going to generate the most revenue. Sometimes it can just happen in too short of a period of time. But yeah, like I spoke about, it uses a massive AI retrieval system to rank and match creatives in real time, and more options equals better optimization. And I think this was really if we can nail this and kind of get that system in place in terms of the inputting the right creatives, like next year, the brands that do that will really succeed, because it's actually quite difficult to do from an idea generation perspective and then also from a delivery perspective. So yeah, again, it's just changing so quickly. So what to do, build creative pipeline with the V3 in mind. So volume, 15 plus creatives per month per SKU. That's kind of the benchmark. It obviously depends on budgets. Variety. This is really important, like UGC, studio, static, motion, testimonials. Obviously, like UGC was driving a lot of revenue for a lot of brands. Probably like early last year, and kind of like I feel like it's just kind of slowly teetered off. But from a static image perspective, going back to that offer and going back to that copy, I really feel like a lot of the brands that we're working with are seeing really strong new customer acquisition off the back of static images. And testimonials are really strong too. So take that into consideration. And then from a refresh perspective, again, depends on budget, but every 2 to 4 weeks, you want to cut out the the bottom kind of 20% and input them with creatives that are more kind of brand new. So yeah, a lot's changing really quick, and it's the brands that kind of keep an eye on this that are really gonna accelerate.
Definitely. Just to jump on that, Olivia has dropped a great question in the chat. I'll pull it up on the screen. Now, what would be the daily budget for a campaign with 50 creatives in it? Wouldn't you be scared of budget fragmentation? So definitely that's a consideration. Ultimately, what Meta have said is the recommendation is you want to have enough budget, to allow it to make decisions. That you have 50, not necessarily creatives, but enough budget to support 50 conversions per ad set per week. Now, ultimately, for businesses operating outside of the US market, that can be harder to kind of get up to that scale. So to Leighton's point, you might want a testing campaign. I think ultimately you probably want, if you're looking at having 50 creatives and you're scared of budget fragmentation, I would probably start with less than 50, because ultimately, in order to calculate the exact budget you'd need, you'd have to figure out, reverse engineer that 50 conversions per week. Consider your average order value and your kind of maximum CPA you're able to spend. So let's just say, for argument's sake, your AOV was $100 and you're willing to spend up to like $25. So you'd be 25 by 50 would be your kind of minimum budget that you'd want to look at in that context. Now, again, that might take a little bit of time to work up to, but even as a starting point, I just consider, okay, you want enough budget that you can conceivably drive a number of sales per day. I had a situation there with a brand who had an AOV of $300 and they're only spending $20 per day, which is a very tough bar to get, because you're not giving Meta enough spend to kind of make decisions. It's a little bit of a catch-22 there, because you want to show some potential, but again, that's how they would typically think about it. Anything to add on that, Leighton?
No, apologies, I just muted myself. Every night the ice cream man parks outside my house, so I just had to. But you hit the nail on the head. And yeah, like I said, take it with a pinch of salt. They're pushing it. This is what they're saying, but a little bit of manual human input needs to be considered for sure.
Cool, nice. Okay, perfect. So retention. So ultimately, it's naturally a big focus of any Black Friday campaign. We want to kind of build on top of the relationships we already have, but we would always really be inclined to make sure that ad spend isn't used primarily for repeat customers. So in turn, email is really the primary channel you're using for repeat buyers. It sounds straightforward, but so often we see businesses that are ultimately promoting aggressively through email, and their ads are kind of trying to reach that same customer. The challenge with that is ideally you've already, you definitely have already paid for those customers at some point in the past. And ideally you don't want to double pay for them unless the value they generate is just very high, that it justifies spending on another CPA on their ads. So with that in mind, email is naturally going to be the primary channel that you want to use. And the kind of main challenge we would see businesses deal with and face is they try to treat their full email list as one big block. But naturally, that's made up of a number of types of customers purchasing with different variables and kind of in different ways. First one, I know Leighton will touch on this in a second, but past Black Friday, Cyber Monday customers who purchased in the time period last year, maybe the year before, maybe the year before that. I wouldn't go too much further. And with that in mind, these are customers that, albeit maybe more discount driven, they've given you a certain level of intent. They've shown intent by purchasing at this time of the year before. Also, you might want to look at customers who haven't purchased this year at all. So again, for each of these audiences, you may be willing to give more or less discounting, depending on how compelling an offer they need to actually be re-engaged. Maybe there's customers who haven't purchased in the last 6 months, so they're ultimately engaged, but actually could do it a reminder. So maybe you're not willing to give as much to them because again they have given incentives. They've given incentives. They've shown intent, I suppose, is a better way to put it. And then finally, your VIPs, and again, you might define that these customers who've purchased at least twice or 3 times in the last year, who haven't purchased this BFCM season. So they maybe haven't purchased after the 1st of October, for example. So those customers, you maybe don't need to necessarily give a big 50% discount sticker or whatever kind of range you're looking at. They actually might be more driven by maybe exclusivity, new product releases. Maybe you can actually focus on bigger bundles, gifting. They've already bought in the brand. It's already level of trust there. So ultimately, you can communicate them in different ways. Again, not every business will need to go into this level of detail. But again, especially, if you're feeling like, oh, I need a strong incentive, but I don't want to give away all my margin, that segmentation could be a really viable strategy. And all that means is you might send some emails to some people and others you won't. It doesn't need to be a fancy kind of setup. When it comes to that lifetime value piece, that's an important component with retention. If we're going to be kind of acquiring sales, we want to know that we're acquiring sales from customers who are going to likely come back. So again, considering what that relevant lifetime is. So going back to some of our kind of first, sales there, or kind of first slides, I should say, we need to understand, okay, we don't want to be waiting more than like 6-12 months when we're acquiring a customer to kind of repay that in retention. If it's a situation where you're in that kind of early category, you're a furniture business, you might need to stay first order profit. And again, these aren't the customers you want to spend on ads again. But if you see high growth and lifetime value, you can be more aggressive in acquiring new customers. Probably the broader point here being good retention actually starts with good acquisition. If you acquire the right kind of customers, the ones that are going to come back and aren't kind of bought in under certain pretenses, it just makes this a lot easier as well. And again, taking a look at that Q4 data, did they actually come back? So it's kind of very much, while it might seem repetitious, it actually is very much full circle. You need to consider both together as well. Ultimately as well, one challenge that kind of affects that lifetime value is that big bunch of returns that some industries will inevitably see in December and into the new year. And so we would often recommend looking at return programs that incentivize exchanges and kind of more efficient returns processes. I think one thing we've seen consistently is that as the likes of kind of ASOS and kind of big returns driven platforms have been forced to kind of try to clamp down on serial returners, fulfillment providers, 3PLs also in the same position. Speaking to a merchant this morning who has kind of very high costs whenever a return is processed, and from his 3PL, so on that basis needs to be very careful. Keeping in touch with customers after they buy to help with issues, all the various kind of pre-purchase information to make sure they have kind of effective size guides, visible, whatever the case may be. And also watch out for customers who return too much. It's a very simple thing to do, but you could easily set up within your Klaviyo segments, maybe a segment for someone who's returned at least 3 times. Those aren't the customers you want to be giving the discounted offers to, because ultimately you're already working on a very restricted margin and you don't really have the capacity to support the kind of return behaviors. Again, sometimes there needs to be a longer time allowed for those returns to make sure, based on the calendar, based on the timeline, they can allow for that. And ultimately, again, going back to that first point, offering gift cards and rewards points to kind of incentivize kind of good behavior, for lack of a better term, which ultimately equates to kind of more margin left in your pocket as a business.
I thought that was really interesting what you said about making sure that you're getting the right customers in, because it's happened a couple of times where we're working with a brand and they're a they're a reasonable price product. They're just maybe above average price product, and they have a lot of stock, and they go through this season of a lot of sales and a lot of offers and a little bit too heavy discounting, because you got to do what you got to do. But what that results in is attracting customers that are used to buying on a discount or used to not paying full price, and sometimes it's kind of hard to rebuild that and get the same level of frequency of customers spending more. And people can start expecting the discounts a bit too frequently. You've probably seen that happen.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to work backwards. It just sets a certain expectation that you're kind of like, your retention agency is probably dealing with at some point in the future if you don't get the acquisition right. So, and ultimately you're dealing with it as a business.
Yeah. So going back to what Karl said, yeah, look, let's try to lean as much as possible on the retention side of people in that Q4 period. Like, of course, you want to spend. Look, there's definitely your place for your retargeting to make sure that there's a lot of people going to be shouting offers and discounts during that period of time. So you do need to be allocating some of your capital towards remarketing to previous customers and potential new customers. But that was on your side. But yeah, taking all that into consideration, now is the time to acquire them because it's going to be cheaper. Your CPMs are going to be more cost effective. So taking that into consideration, something that we roll out for most of them, for most brands, around probably starting last month and then right up until October is it depends, and also this the amount of budget allocated to this depends, but we want to acquire as many emails as much as possible. So sometimes people are running a consistent VIP early access email to get them into the ecosystem. You have your kind of standard €10 off your first order hook, but just having that run in the background, just to kind of retarget traffic, retarget people who maybe came in through an organic piece of content or maybe came in through a paid ad. It's a really nice way to get them in during this time period. And then they'll be in your ecosystem when the Q4 comes, and you can continuously remarket to them then. Q4 is the perfect time to wake up your biggest list that might be dormant. So anybody that might have purchased last year but hasn't purchased to date, so you can create a segment within there. Wake those people up. If you have somebody good on the retention side, they'll definitely be building that out already. But that's crucial. And I'd love for more brands in Ireland and the UK to look at loyalty programs and to look at building out that ecosystem to really reward the customer. I mean, even the older I get, I'm experiencing it too. I want, like, there's times where I want to fly with a certain airline to pick up those points. Even there's one brand, they have a really cool loyalty program, and it just does make you consider purchasing from them frequently. And I'm seeing it with the brands that we're working with. So, for example, Park and Ronan here, who we've been working with for the last couple of years, they built out this loyalty program, and they have, I can't really see them on my side because of the size of the screen, but they have this really cool widget that pops up on the site, and I think they call it their passport. And I think it's a blue passport holder that gets you in the door. You spend $0, and then you have your gold and your platinum. And each time you reach those purchase points, you unlock like a reward. And there's so many fun things you can do with it. Sometimes it's a free gift. Represent, for example, they do a Christmas present. They also give early access to people who I think it's on their side have spent over $1,000. Anybody who's reached that limit, they get early access to product. And a lot of the cosmetics and wellness and beauty brands, they are taking this into the real world, and anybody that's maybe purchased over €1,000 worth of product, they're inviting them to a yearly party, or they're inviting them to a cocktail hour. So there's a lot of fun we can have with loyalty programs, and taking into consideration the way the economy is going and the consumer in general, I think people are receiving really well to them. I know from my perspective, just as life goes on, I used to not want, like, if Urban Outfitters said, "Oh, do you want to join the club for 10% off?" I just said, "Oh no, it's grand, like, don't worry about it." But now I really do want to build up the points, and build a relationship with the brand. So yeah, look at all those different options. But yeah, from a retention perspective, let's try to extract as much value as possible from Q4. Let's try to get as many customers into that ecosystem over the next kind of 3 months. And from an SMS perspective, so SMS is obviously really expensive. It's expensive, but in the BFCM rush, it's probably worth doing one text message blast. Now obviously some brands are more consistent with that, but SMS is definitely something to throw your eye over if you do think that you're gonna acquire a lot of customers over that weekend, and send out maybe 1 or 2 messages to clear some stock. Another thing is kind of Top Cart. Have you ever seen Top Cart, Karl? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially from a loyalty perspective, if you have that built-in audience that, an app, based on your industry, based on your category, could be really strong. There's a couple of tools in that space. So yeah, anything that kind of keeps you a little bit closer and maybe gets you out of, any of the kind of noisy channels, there will be a really good opportunity there.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and they do cool kind of push notifications for mobile phones too. So lots to look at there. And if you do want any help with that, please do reach out and we can show you what we're doing for some other brands.
Class. Great. We're coming up on time. Just as we finish, we have a couple of resources that we're kind of eager to share with everyone. So you have some kind of practical takeaways as part of the session. Maybe Leighton, you can give some context on a couple of case studies.
Yeah. So on my side, I've built, I think there's 8 case studies of what we've done together with StoreHero. So how we've used the platform to essentially kind of transform some of these brands and transform how we're advertising. And we're looking at that from an acquisition perspective, a retention perspective, and also from a creative perspective. So some of from the signups that I saw, the majority of them were kind of in Ireland. So from an Irish perspective, like Fada, that was already a really strong business, and on the year-to-year growth, it's 192%. And StoreHero and like the Leighton social team education on StoreHero has really kind of made that happen and really kind of accelerated it. Sosu Cosmetics last year experienced 39% year-on-year growth, despite a 23% decrease in ad spend. Would not have been possible without StoreHero. Vacious, if you look down at the bottom, that's experienced a 77% growth in new customer sales. And again, understanding how we extend the lifetime value, understanding what our new customer acquisition cost was, really just helped that whole strategy. And True Subscriptions is an absolute rocket ship based in the States, and a really strong business. I think like the average, I think it'll become a household name over the next couple of years. They're really leading the charge. They're on Joe Rogan, and everybody's kind of talking about their products. But yeah, again, 250% increase in contribution margin, and using StoreHero has really allowed us to accelerate spend over there, to accelerate spend across all kind of customers. So if you want these 4 case studies and then also a couple of more, just shoot me an email. And lads, I'm totally cool with sharing this with agencies too. I want to share as much value as possible, and I couldn't recommend the StoreHero side of things. So if you're tech, if you're brand, if you're agency, reach out to me. It's Leighton@LeightonSocial.com, and I'm happy to send these over. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
Class. And then from there as well, a couple of resources that could be beneficial, especially as you get into the planning stage. One of the really simplest ways in order to understand what's the kind of profit you're generated on each order, and therefore what's the maximum you can afford to spend on ads, is using our free order profit calculator. So with this, you can input and plug in your costs, and it'll tell you if you want to be profitable on first order, this is how much you can spend. If you want to be profitable on order 2, this is how much you can spend. So you can actually work backwards and have a very clear view. Okay, are my ads actually stacking up? Am I getting customers at the right cost? And then from there, our forecast template. So if you're now in a position where you're looking to kind of build that plan, whether it's a 12-month plan, 6-month plan, whatever the case may be, inputting your key goals, your sales goal, your profit goal, and actually seeing, okay, what does that look like over the course of the year? It can give you a really practical view of that. So whether it's the case studies that kind of give specific industry-driven tactics and an overview as to how it works, and then some of these kind of templates to kind of help build your own plan, you're kind of set up and sorted with a ton of resource and ton of free value, all going well, that we've got some great feedback on to date whenever we've shared these before. So we'll kind of bring it to a close. Really appreciate everyone with a ton of signups. So I know not only anyone on the webinar today live, there'll be a ton of recorded kind of attendees as well, or kind of watchers, I suppose, who'll be able to catch up over the next couple of days. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Leighton. Appreciate the time. I think yeah, it's I'm sure people will get a ton of value out of it. So we'll do it again. Thanks everyone, and yeah, please do get in touch. Happy to chat and speak soon.
Thanks a lot. See you later.